I'm amazed how many people own stocks. They would not be able to tell you why they own it. They couldn't say in a minute or less why they own it. Actually, if you really press them down, they'd say the reason I own this is the sucker's going up. I mean, that's the only reason. That's the only reason they own it. And if you can't explain, I'm serious, you can't explain to a 10-year-old in 2 minutes or less why you own a stock, you shouldn't own it. And that's true, I think, about 80% of people that own stocks. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I love this town, and it's a thrill to be here with Jim Johnson, who did so much for Fannie Mae, and that was the greatest single stock in my life, and it's still my largest position. And anybody wants to talk after about how to make money, I'll tell them how to buy more Fannie Mae, and now I've added Freddie Mac to the list too. And Congressman Ed Markey, who went to Boston College and also Boston College Law School, and has done a great job in Congress for everybody in this country, but especially the people in his districts in Massachusetts. But great honor is to have my wife Carolyn right here, my sweetheart, my great stock picker who found legs and a bunch of other good stocks. So what I'm going to try and do today briefly is, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this gavel. I've never had one of these things before. I'm going to try and say some words on the things I've used over the years when I was an amateur, when I ran Magellan, I still use today. I think they make sense. I think they make a lot of sense for investors, and I frankly think it's a tragedy in America that the small investor has been convinced by the media, the print media, the radio, the television media, that they don't have a chance. The big institutions with all their computers and all their degrees and all their money have all the edges, and it just isn't true at all. And when they're convinced, when this happens, when this occurs, people act accordingly. When they believe it, they buy stocks for a week, and they buy options, and they buy the Chile fund this week, and next week it's the Argentina fund, and they get results proportionate to that kind of investing. And that's very bothersome. I think the public can do extremely well in the stock market on their own. I think the fact that institutions dominate the market today is a positive for small investors. These institutions push stocks on unusual lows, they push them on unusual highs. For someone that can sit back and have their own opinion, know something about an industry, this is a positive. It's not a negative. So that's what I want to talk about. And the single most important thing to me in the stock market for anyone is to know what you own. I'm amazed how many people own stocks. They would not be able to tell you why they own it. They couldn't say in a minute or less why they own it. Actually, if you really press them down, they'd say the reason I own this is the sucker's going up. I mean, that's the only reason. That's the only reason they own it. And if you can't explain, I'm serious, you can't explain to a 10-year-old in 2 minutes or less why you own a stock, you shouldn't own it. And that's true, I think, about 80% of people that own stocks. And this is the kind of stock people like to own. This is the kind of company people adore owning. This is a relatively simple company. They make a very narrow, easy to understand product. They make a 1 megabit SRAM, CMOS, bipolar risk, floating point, data I/O array processor with an optimizing compiler, a 16 dual port memory, a double diffused metal oxide semiconductor monolithic logic chip with a plasma matrix vacuum fluorescent display. It has a 16-bit dual memory. It has a Unix operating system, 4 whetstone megaflop polysilicon emitter, a high bandwidth, that's very important, 6 gigahertz, double metallization communication protocol, an asynchronous backward compatibility, peripheral bus architecture, 4-wave interleave memory, a token ring interchange backplane, and it does it in 15 nanoseconds of capability. Now, if you own a piece of crap like that, you will never make money. Never. Somebody will come along with more whetstones or less whetstones or a bigger megaflop or a smaller megaflop. You won't have the foggiest idea what's happened. And people buy this junk all the time. I made money in Dunkin' Donuts. I can understand it. When there was recessions, I didn't have to worry about what was happening. I could go there and people were still there. I didn't have to worry about low-priced Korean imports. I mean, I just didn't have, I can understand it. And you laugh, I made 10 or 15 times my money in Dunkin' Donuts. Those are the kind of stocks I can understand. If you don't understand it, it doesn't work. This is the single biggest principle. And it bothers me that people are very careful with their money. The public, when they buy a refrigerator, they get a Consumer Reports. They buy a microwave oven, they do that. They ask people what's the best kind of radar range, or what kind of car to buy. They do research on apartments. When they go on a trip to Wyoming, they get the mobile travel guide, or California. When they go to Europe, they get the Michelin travel guide. People will hear a tip on a bus on some stock, and they'll put half their life savings in it before sunset, and they wonder why they lose money in the stock market. And when they lose money, they blame it on the institutions and program trading. That is garbage. They didn't do any research. They bought a piece of junk. They didn't look at the balance sheet, and that's what you get for it. And that's what we're being driven to, and it's self-fulfilling. The public does terrible investing, and they say they don't have a chance. It's because that's the way they're acting. I'm trying to convince people there is a method. There are reasons for stocks that go up. Coca-Cola, this is very magic. It's a very magic number. Easy to remember. Coca-Cola is earning 30 times per share what they did 32 years ago. The stock has gone up 30-fold. Bethlehem Steel is earning less than they did 30 years ago. The stock is half its price of 30 years ago. Stocks are not lottery tickets. There's a company behind every stock. If a company does well, the stock does well. It's not that complicated. People get too carried away. And first of all, they try and predict the stock market. That is a total waste of time. No one can predict the stock market. They try to predict interest rates. I mean, if anybody would predict interest rates right 3 times in a row, they'd be a billionaire. Considering there's not that many billionaires on the planet, it's very, I had logics, I had a syllogism and studied these when I was at Boston College. There can't be that many people who can predict interest rates because there'd be lots of billionaires. And no one can predict the economy. I had a lot of people in this room were around in 1981 and 82 when we had a 20% prime rate with double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment. I don't remember anybody telling me in 1981 about it. I didn't read, I studied all this stuff. I don't remember anybody telling me we're going to have the worst recession since the Depression. So what I'm trying to tell you, it'd be very useful to know what the stock market is going to do. It'd be terrific to know that the Dow Jones average a year from now would be X, that we're going to have a full-scale recession, or interest rates are going to be 12%. That's useful stuff. You never know it, though. You just don't get to learn it. So I've always said, if you spend 14 minutes a year on economics, you've wasted 12 minutes. And I really believe that. Now, I have to be fair. I'm talking about economics on the broad scale, predicting the downturn for next year, or the upturn, or M1 and M2, 3B, and all these M's. I'm talking about economics. To me, is when you talk about scrap prices. When I own auto stocks, I want to know what's happening to used car prices. When used car prices are going up, it's a very good indicator. When I own hotel stocks, I want to know what hotel occupancy is about. When I own chemical stocks, I want to know what's happening to the price of ethylene. These are facts. If aluminum inventories go down 5 straight months, that's relevant. I can deal with that. Home affordability, I want to know about when I own Fannie Mae, or I own a housing stock. These are facts. They're economic facts, and there's economic predictions. And economic predictions are a total waste. And interest rates, Alan Greenspan's a very honest guy. He would tell you that he can't predict interest rates. He could tell you what short rates are going to do in the next 6 months. Try and stick him on what the long-term rate will be 3 years from now. He'll say, I don't have any idea. So how are you, the investor, supposed to predict interest rates if the head of the Federal Reserve can't do it? So I think that's, but you should study history, and history is the important thing you learn from. What you learn from history is the market goes down. It goes down a lot. The math is simple. There's been 93 years a century. This is easy to do. The market's had 50 declines of 10% or more. So 50 declines in 93 years. About once every 2 years, the market falls 10%. We call that a correction. That means, that's a euphemism for losing a lot of money rapidly. But we call it a correction. And so 50 declines in 93 years, about once every 2 years, the market falls 10%. Of those 50 declines, 15 have been 25% or more. That's known as a bear market. We've had 15 declines in 93 years. So every 6 years, the market's going to have a 25% decline. That's all you need to know. You need to know the market's going to go down sometime. If you're not ready for that, you shouldn't own stocks. And it's good when it happens. If you like a stock at 14 and it goes to 6, that's great. You understand the company, you look at the balance sheet, and they're doing fine, and you're hoping to get to 22 with it. 14 to 22 is terrific. 6 to 22 is exceptional. So you take advantage of these declines. They're going to happen. No one knows when they're going to happen. It would be people tell you about it after the fact that they predicted it, but they predicted it 53 times. And So you can take advantage of the volatility in the market if you understand what you own. So I think that's the key to element. Another key element is that you have plenty of time. People are in an unbelievable rush to buy a stock. I'll give you an example of a well-known company. Walmart went public in October of 1970. 1970 went public. Already had a great record. It had 15 years performance, great balance sheet. You could have waited 10 years saying you're a very conservative investor, you're not sure this Walmart can make it. You want to check, you see them operate in small towns, you're afraid they can only make it in 7 or 8 states, you want to wait till they go to more states. You keep waiting. You could have bought Walmart 10 years after they went public and made 35 times your money. If you bought it when they went public, you would have made 500 times your money, but you could have waited 10 years after Walmart went public and made over 30 times your money. You could wait 3 years after Microsoft went public and made 10 times your money. Now, if you knew something about software, I know nothing about software. If you knew something about software, you would have said, these guys have it. I don't care who's going to win, Compaq, IBM. I know who's going to win Japanese computers. I know Microsoft, MS-DOS is the right thing. You could have bought Microsoft. Again, I'm repeating myself, stocks are not a lottery ticket. There's a company behind every stock. And you can just watch it. You have plenty of time. People are in an amazing rush to purchase a security. They're out of breath when they call up. You don't need to do this. It's you need an edge to make money, too. People have incredible edges, and they throw them away. I'll give you a quick example of SmithKline. This was a stock that had Tagamet. Now, you didn't have to buy SmithKline when Tagamet was doing clinical trials. You didn't have to buy SmithKline when Tagamet was talked about in the New England Journal of Medicine or the British version, Lancet. You could have bought SmithKline when Tagamet first came out, a year after it came out. Let's say your spouse, your mother, your father, you were a nurse, you were a druggist, you're writing all these prescriptions. Tagamet was doing an amazing job of curing ulcers, and it was a wonderful pill for the company because if you just stopped taking it, the ulcer came back. See, it would have been a crummy product that you took it for $1 and it went away, but it was a great product for the company. But you could have bought it 2 years after the product was on the market and made 5 or 6 times your money. I mean, all the druggists, all the nurses, all the people, millions of people saw this product. And they're out buying oil companies, or drilling rigs, It happens. And then 3 years later or 4 years later, Glaxo, even a bigger company, it's a huge company, a British company, brought out Zantac, which was a better, at that time, an improved product. And you could have seen that take market share, do well. You could have bought Glaxo and triple your money. So you only need a few stocks in your lifetime. They're in your industry. I think of people, if you'd worked in the auto industry, let's say you're an auto dealer the last 10 years, you would have seen Chrysler come up with a minivan. You've seen, if you're a Buick dealer, a Toyota dealer, Honda dealer, you would have seen the Chrysler dealership packed with people. You could have made 10 times your money on Chrysler a year after the minivan came out. Ford introduced the Taurus Sable, the most successful line of cars in the last 20 years. Ford went up 7-fold on the Taurus Sable. So if you're a car dealer, you only need to buy a few stocks every decade. When your lifetime's over, you don't need a lot of 5-baggers to make a lot of money starting with $10,000 or $5,000. So in your own industry, you're going to see a lot of stocks, and that's what bothers me. There are good stocks out there looking for you, and people just aren't listening, and they're just not watching it. And they have incredible edges. People have big edges over me. They work in the aluminum industry. I see aluminum industries coming down, inventories coming down 6 straight months. They see demand improving. In America today, it's hard to get an EPA permit for a bowling alley, never mind an aluminum smelter. So when aluminum gets tight, you just can't build 7 aluminum smelters. So when you see this coming, you can say, wait a second, I can make some money. When an industry goes from terrible to mediocre, the stock goes north. When it goes from mediocre to good, the stock goes north. And it goes from good to terrific, the stock goes north. There's lots of ways to make money in your own industry. You can be a supplier in the industry. You can be a customer. This thing happens in the paper industry. It happens in the steel industry. It doesn't happen every week. But if you're in some field, you'll see a turn. You'll see something in the publishing industry. These things come along, and it's just mind-boggling. People throw it away. One of the things I find a couple of rules I want to throw out that I find useful, excuse me, is a lot of times people buy on the basis the stock has gone down this much. How much further can it go down? I remember when Polaroid went from 130 to 100. People said, here's this great company, great record. If it ever gets below 100, just buy every share, And it did get below 100. A lot of people bought on that basis, saying, look, it's gone from 135 to 100. It's now 95. What a buy. Within a year, it was 18. And this is a company with no debt. I mean, this is a company, it was just so overpriced, it went down. I did the same thing in my, I think my first or second year at Fidelity. Kaiser Industries had gone from $26 a share to 16. I said, how much lower can it go? It's 16. So I think we bought one of the biggest blocks ever on the American Stock Exchange of Kaiser Industries at 14. I said, it's gone from 26 to 16. How much lower can it go? Well, at 10, I called my mother and said, Mom, you got to look at this Kaiser Industries. I mean, how much lower can it go? It's gone from 26 to 10. Well, it went to 6, it went to 5, it went to 4, it went to 3. And now, unfortunately, this happened rapidly, or I would probably be still caddying or working at the Stop and Shop, but it happened fast. So I was able to, it was compressed. And at 3, I figured out, there's something very wrong here, because Kaiser Industries owns 40% of Kaiser Steel, they own 40% of Kaiser Aluminum, they own 32% of Kaiser Cement, they own Kaiser Broadcasting, they own Kaiser Sand and Gravel, Kaiser Engineers, they own Jeep, they own business after business, and they had no debt. Now, I learned this very early. This might be a breakthrough for some people. It's very hard to go bankrupt if you don't have any debt. It's tricky. Some people can approach that. It's a real achievement. But they had no debt, and the whole company at 3 was selling at about $75 million. At that point, it was equal to buying one Boeing 747. I said, there's something wrong with this company selling for $75 million. I was a little premature at 16, but I said, everything's fine, and eventually this will work out. And what they did is they gave away all their shares to their shareholders. They passed out shares in Kaiser Cement, they passed out shares in Kaiser Aluminum, they passed out their public shares in Kaiser Steel, they sold all the other businesses, and you get about $50 a share. But if you didn't understand the company, if you're just buying on the fact the stock had gone from 26 to 16, and then it went to 10, what would you do when it went to 9? What would you do when it went to 8? What would you do when it went to 7? This is the problem that people have, is they sell stocks because they didn't know why they bought it, then it went down, and they don't know what to do now. Do you flip a coin? Do you walk around the block? What do you do? Psychiatrists haven't worked so far. I've never seen them running in. The Psychological Psychiatry Fund, I've never seen listed for with the SEC to make it through as a mutual fund. So they haven't seemed to help. I've tried prayer. That hasn't worked. So if you don't understand the company, you have this problem when they go down. Eventually, they always come back. This one doesn't work either. People think RCA just about got back to its 1929 high when General Electric took it over. A lot of double knits never came back. Remember those beauties? Floppy disks, Western Union. The list goes on and on. People saying it'll come back. Well, it doesn't have to come back. Here's another one you hear all the time. It's $3. How much can I lose? I've had people call me up saying, I'm thinking of buying this stock at 3. How much can I lose? Well, again, you may need a piece of paper for this, but if you put if you put $20,000 in a stock at 50, or your neighbor put $20,000 at 50 into the stock, and you put $20,000 in at 3, and it goes to 0, you lose exactly the same amount of money, everything. And people say it's 3. How much can I lose? Well, if you put $1 million on it, you can lose $1 million. Just the fact that stock, this may be a reason to research a stock. The fact that stock is 3 down from 100 doesn't mean you should buy it. And in fact, short sellers, people that really make money in stocks, they don't short Walmart, they don't short Home Depot, they don't short the great companies, Johnson & Johnson. They short stocks down from 80 to 7. They'd like to short it at 16 or 22, but they figured out at 7 that this company is going to go to 0. They just haven't blown taps on this thing yet. It's going to 0. And they're selling it short at 7, they're selling it short at 6, at 5, at 4, at 3, at 2, at 1 1/4. And you know to sell something short, you need a buyer. Somebody has to buy the damn thing. And you wonder, who's buying this thing? It's these people saying it's 3. How much lower can it go? Now, here's a subject that you probably all talked about. Getting close. Getting close. All right, we'll drop that one out. It's getting very close, so everybody has to go somewhere. So the important thing is you can't get too attached to a stock. You have to understand there's a company behind it. You can't treat this like your grandchildren. No, you have to deal with the stock and say, I understand the company, and if it deteriorates, if the fundamentals slip, you have to say goodbye to it. If one rule you want to remember is the stock does not know you own it. This is a breakthrough. So don't get, you have to understand it and say they're doing well, and as long as they keep doing well, my best stocks have been my 5th, 6th, 7th year I own them, not my 5th, 6th, 7th day. So you have to understand that and stay with it. And then I'll switch through to my, my long shots. Avoid long shots. I bought about 30 long shots in my life. I've never broken even on one. The ones that are really bad are what we call whisper stocks. And if Arthur Levitt was here, he'd appreciate these stories. But these are the kinds that somebody calls you up and say, "Hi, Peter. How's Carolyn? How are the kids? And I'd like to talk to you about international blivet." And what they have in this company is very good earnings. Earnings going to be very. They're going to be big, small. $3, $1 a share. And they keep whispering. They say, "What are you talking about? I don't understand it." And these are now either they're so surrounded by people they're going to run out and buy this stock because it's so exciting, or they think the SEC is listening in. They'll get a shorter term. They'll get 6 months in the camp rather than 2 years in the camp. But whisper stocks don't work. And then I want to conclude with there's always something to worry about. If you own stocks, there's always something to worry about. You can't get away from it. What happens in the 50s, people were worried about the only reason we got out of the Depression was World War II. We got another recession. In the early 50s, they said we're going to go right back into a depression. People worried about a depression in the 50s, and they worried about nuclear war. I mean, back then, the little warheads they had then, they couldn't blow up McLean, West Virginia, or McLean, Virginia, or Charlestown. Now, all these countries that end in STAN, there's 9 of these STAN countries that have come out of Russia. They all have enough warheads to blow the world up, and no one worries about it. When I was a kid, people were building fallout shelters, and we used to have this civil defense drill. Remember this one in high school? You get under your desk. I never thought even then that was a particularly good thing to do. They'd blow a whistle, somebody put on a hat, we'd all get under our desk. But in the 50s, people wouldn't buy stocks, except for the 80s. The 50s was the best decade, the century of the stock market. And people wouldn't buy stocks in the 50s because they're worried about nuclear war and they're worried about recent depression. Then people, remember when oil went from 4 to 40 and it was going to go to 100 and we're going to have a depression? Remember that one? Well, about 3 years later, the same experts, now higher paid, oil's now at 10, and they said it was going to go to 4, and we're going to have a depression. And then the Japanese, remember how the Japanese were going to own the world? Remember that one? And that we're going to have a depression? And then about 2 years later, we're all worried about Japan collapsing. And this is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. There's a company with a 20% savings rate, incredible workforce, incredible productivity, and people are saying we're going to have a depression because Japan's going to collapse. And they had, on their prayer list, they loaded Mother Teresa and crippled children, and they were praying for Japan at night. It's unbelievable. I mean, the LDC debt. Remember the LDC debt? Remember that one? All these countries, Chase had lent their net worth to Brazil, Chile, Peru, and all these other countries, and so and all the other countries. And LD said they were not going to pay it back, and we're going to have a depression. It always ends, and we're going to have a depression, or the Great Depression. We have the Great Depression. I never could quite understand that adjective in front of depression, but the Great Depression, or the big one. The big one's coming. But all these countries, and now I understand. These are called then they were called less developed countries. Now we used to call them underdeveloped countries. Those are all wrong terms. Those are not politically correct. You have to call these emerging countries. You can't use less developed or underdeveloped because that's. In fact, the other day I heard the politically correct term for somebody that's overweight is laterally challenged. That's so there's always something to worry about, and the key organ in your body in the stock market is your stomach. It's not the brain. If you can add 8 and 8 and get reasonably close to 16, that's the only level of math you need to know. You don't know to need the area under the curve. Remember that quadratic equation and an integral calculus and the area under the curve? I mean, whoever cared what was under the damn curve? I mean, but you had to study this. You don't need this in the stock market. So all you have to know is you're going to see, it's always going to be scary. There's going to be always something to worry about. And you just have to forget all about it. Cut it all out and own good companies or own turnarounds. Study them and you'll do well. And that's all there is, and I'm ready for questions.
Okay, thank you very much.